Hello everybody, I'm your host Hal Curtis and I'd like to welcome you to The Space Industry by satsearch, where we share stories about the companies taking us into orbit. In this podcast, we delve into the opinions and expertise of the people behind the commercial space organisations of today who could become the household names of tomorrow. Before we get started with the episode, remember you can find out more information about the suppliers, products and innovations that are mentioned in this discussion on the global marketplace for space at satsearch.com. Hello and welcome to today's episode. I'm joined today by Giovanni Pandolfi of LeafSpace, a ground segment as a service provider with headquarters in Italy and sites across the world. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the ground segment as a service business model and how it can improve procurement processes, particularly for satellite integrators and companies that have multiple missions. So Giovanni, welcome to the Space Industry Podcast. It's great that you're with us today.
Hey, hi there. Thanks for having me here.
Fantastic. Let's go into our discussion today. When we talk about the ground segment as a service business model, one of the common bottlenecks that you see when it comes to sort of access to ground stations for satellite operators who have, multiple missions particularly with different customers who they need to serve on different, timescales and in different ways?
Well, there are a few, as you said. Let's take a step back, by the way, maybe focusing on what these players need to do. So it's typically what we refer about as mission providers or in general as constellation operators. So I will divide the two things. Mission providers are, let me say, third parties that build satellites for a certain customer. And in major part of the cases, also they operate the satellite mission from the ground up. So they actually, schedule the satellite, task it for having for it to be images, for example, or they operate the telecommunication payload or whatever. But the fact is that they control the entire mission from satellite manufacturing, launching, LEOP and commissioning, nominal operation, and then the commissioning. And they do this for a third party. They just commission the entire mission to them, saying, okay, I want this kind of data, or I want you to integrate this payload on a satellite bus and then to operate it for me. The other part is actually always satellite operators, but in that case, maybe they own their satellites and they operate it directly, but they manage a constellation or multiple satellites to be operated. In both cases, when you handle multiple missions, there are a few bottlenecks. In the first case, for mission providers, the fact is that every customer has different requirements. Every payload has different way of operation or tasking and scheduling. So you need to take into account of all these different things when you're actually providing a solution. The way for you as a mission provider to make it economically sustainable is try to make it as modular as possible, or to try to put all the common things together and find solutions for those common things. And the same kind of thing applies for the constellation operators, but maybe there they have much less issues just because typically, at least, the constellation are based of similar satellites. So similar satellites, similar systems. So the way of operation could be much more similar to each spacecraft. As I said, one of the bottlenecks, for example, mission operations is really to understand, to make everything together. If you are, for example, using different communication board or transceivers because you have different data rate requirements, you need to find, for example, a ground segment as a service solution for each one. And maybe, interfaces are a little bit different. The way that you schedule your contacts is a little bit different. So also the pricing could be quite different because of these things that I'm saying. So, having a way to put all of these on a unique level and just, focus on how to better streamline your process. This, of course, save you, well, I would say a lot of money some time, but definitely will save you a lot of time. And same thing for constellation operation. If you have an idea of a streamlined process, define interfaces, define pricing structure, etc., that's way better, and your process is much more streamlined. What we try to do in Leaf is actually to find what we call a partnership program, where we can partner actually with our customers to define a common framework agreement where we can have different things all put together. And so when they have a new mission, they just They don't need to sign or negotiate a new contract. They just need to emit to us a service order, like they would have emit to buy a certain component for a satellite to us. And then, we know that we already test everything, that we are already compatible and whatever. And this it's really quite a lot streamlined. So I would say the bottlenecks are both technical, management or procurement wise, but also regulatory wise.
It makes a lot of sense why you've split up the customers in that way, the constellation that maybe operates in one way with multiple satellites, and then an individual company that manages, multiple satellites doing different things and for different customers. You mentioned there your sort of standard framework agreement or the partnership agreement that you have now, and you obviously touched on some of the benefits of that, but from both your point of view as the ground station service provider and from maybe the satellite operator's point of view, what advantages does such a standard agreement bring for where there's a case of requiring to service multiple missions?
Yeah, so definitely for us, and then this automatically reflects as an advantage for our customers. It gives us a possibility of discussion for multiple missions and really understanding much more deeply what our customers needs for more than one mission. So in case we need to do any development or any integration, knowing that we do it for multiple missions, we can push it much more in our pipeline in general, so develop it much faster. On really technical advantages, it's really the thing to have a standardized interface, test it and integrate it once. For example, the interface between the mission control software and our service, we can make all what we call the service readiness test once. We know that all the other missions that you will activate, if they are not really changing too much, they will be already compliant with that. And also any kind of compatibility testing with the baseband processing. So being sure that the RF signal that you're sending actually will be received correctly, decoded correctly, and then the data will be transferred correctly. So there we have an advantage because we have a system that we know already that is working. And then having more and more missions adding to that, of course, reduce the kind of troubleshooting that you need to do every time that you have a new mission. Another thing is that, of course, having these kind of partnerships and having a constant collaboration or discussion with our customers allows us to know what are their needs, maybe not today, but their needs for tomorrow. And so plan accordingly our expansion of the ground station network, for example, or maybe expansion to other frequency bands that we can use because our customers see a natural trend in that use for the coming years, or even adding a certain feature to our APIs because the customer need to have a monitoring, a natural metrics that they need for monitoring. So all of these things, really living it more as a partnership model instead of just a provider customer model makes much more sense for us and give us a little bit more of a view. And the customer also, or the mission provider, can also plan their missions according to what we have already developed, or what we are already operating, the kind of operation that they know it's working.
So they may change how or what they're going to downlink for a mission in 2 or 3 years' time based on the ground stations that you have available, for example, and likewise you may change the setup of those ground stations and where they're located based on what your customers need. Yeah, right, interesting. And you mentioned, of course, the answer to the first question, that regulation is such an important part of this. So aside then, I guess, from the technical benefits that the standard agreement brings, I wondered if you could explain how they could help you take care of regulatory requirements that the satellite operator might be obliged to meet, because they're such a big part of getting a satellite into orbit.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of times it's a part that is, I will not say neglected, but maybe, it's not considered as well as it should be. But this is a thing for the ground segment in general. In particular about, regulations, the thing is that, let's take always the example of the mission provider. So you have multiple mission planned and you have different customers coming to you to say, okay, I want to have this mission flying in this orbit at these specs and so on. If you don't have a natural, let me call it product or process thinking about the fact that you will have multiple missions, multiple customers, what you will end up doing is actually have one license per satellite or per mission that you will launch. And this, of course, reflects in a lot of time because every license takes a lot of time for just the ITU API preparation, submission, notification, publication, and all the other steps through. And you need to repeat the same process every time. And every time, for example, you need also to interface with us to understand, okay, what's your ground station network like right now? What will be like in 2 years? What are the specs of your ground station network again? And put everything together. You need to do this every time. But if you think it about more about an efficient process, what you could do instead is, at least if you have a plan for multiple missions, is to actually, filing a single satellite network to the ITU in which you input maybe different frequencies that you're going to use. Maybe you're not using for the first mission, but at least you have an outlook what you're doing. And in this way, process is much more streamlined for you because you just do one filing process for your entire satellite network. And then when you need to launch new missions, you just launch them and in case notify the ITU. And on our side is much streamlined because we need, of course, to do one license every ground station that we have in every country for every mission that we follow. But if multiple missions are below the same satellite network, we just need to do it once. And in this way, it just not reduce only the time of filing, but also if you need to launch one satellite in the next 3 months because you have an urgency or you have a customer that is paying a lot to launch as fast as possible, we can directly operate to your satellite from the day that you launch instead of waiting for the actual approval of the license and etc. That in some cases it can take even up to several months. And in general, also, all this process helps for the coordination at countries level with other operators in case if you're using a frequency band that needs to be coordinated in some cases. So in general, I believe, the base concept is always try to plan as much as possible your future needs, maybe not specifically on the single mission needs, but specifically in terms of business. And doing this together with us, we can do it once together, and then we are okay, let me say, for the rest of the life, or at least for the rest of the life of the content that we will have.
For the satellite operator, it's a case of try and think like a network operator, try and be forward looking and prepare. So, and that'll help things. So, and then obviously you're working with the ground station network partner in yourselves or alternative companies. So yeah, it makes sense.
Right now, I believe it makes much more sense in the kind of market, on the new space market that we are right now, because the market itself allows for this kind of thinking. So if I was doing this a few years ago, maybe you didn't have the outlook so far to build up all these things. So it was better to focus on a single mission each time. But now the market is a little bit more mature, let me say. The mission providers are also more mature and their offer is more mature. So they can have an outlook on actually the missions that they have already as backlog or their planned missions. And so having this future or forward-looking approach definitely pays off.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about things on the commercial side. I wonder if you could maybe elaborate how the volume and the pricing structure can work for, operating a standard framework agreement across multiple missions for a satellite operator.
Let's start from the basics. As a service provider, we need to have all our ground stations running efficiently. And this means try to increase the duty cycle or the number of contacts per day that one single ground station does as much as possible. Because in this way, of course, our costs are much better amortized, and then the price that we can provide to our customers is much better, of course. So what we came up with for this partnership program is actually to build a volume-based discount in our pricing structure. So we have our pricing model that is based on a price per minute of contact, for example, depending on the actual data rate that we are transmitting or downlinking, depending from the satellite. But then we have different ranges of specific price depending on the volume of minutes that we are handling day by day with a specific customer under a specific content. So all this complicated thing to just say, of course, that as much missions we are handling under the same contract, the more volume we will actually provide of contracts per day, and then the lower the price per minute will be. And this is really good, for economics of scale because it's really fixed. So this is a standard volume discount that we have, and you can actually directly see your projections in terms of how many missions you will have one day, and then you can see what will be the price per minute for you. And this, applies to any active mission that we have for a single customer under the same contract. So even though you will have slightly different missions, so for example, one mission just doing TT&C on S-band and another mission doing X-band downlink at high data rate, it all counts as the same volume of minutes per day. And since we do it daily, also you can actually have a favorable pricing structure at the end of the month.
Right, interesting. So you've really broken it down to that core of data per day, minutes per day. So that's brilliant. So apart from streamlining pricing based on volume and helping to meet the regulatory requirements as we've discussed, what other sort of improvements do you foresee adding to a ground segment as a service operation like yours in order to keep adding value in the future to satellite operators?
Well, one thing for sure is what we discussed before. So doing a one-time integration, so we have a really simple interfaces and whatever. So our customers are integrating with our system quite fastly in the matters of hours, I will say. So it's really easy to do that. But one thing that is really important when you're handling multiple missions is not to rebuild the interface or retest it every time. If you can do it once and using that as also your benchmark, then you save money because you don't need to redevelop any integration every time. You save time because, of course, integration time, but also testing time and so on. And also you can better address your operations to be aligned with the kind of interfaces or metrics that we provide and so on. In addition to that, this is a lot of, let me say, operational or mission management process that saves time and money. Another fact is that with this kind of partnership, we really want to discuss with our customer what they want us to do in order to improve the service and so on. So having these framework agreements in place give us a better outlook on their missions. And so we can say, okay, this customer is asking us to develop this, and this feature, then we can put in the pipeline because it makes sense for us to put in the pipeline. And also because any feature maybe that is needed for customer A can be used also for customer B, C, and D. So it's really more, as I said, as a partnership than just as a provision of service, because we want to improve our service as our customers need us to do.
And that makes a lot of sense from a business perspective. So yeah, thanks for explaining that. And I guess my final question builds onto that. Obviously, please, only share things you're allowed and you're comfortable with sharing, but maybe based on the emerging requirements of your customers or the future requirements that you think your customers might have and other trends and changes you're seeing in the industry. I wondered if you could explain to us a little bit about where you see the ground segment as a service market moving.
Well, that's a good question. I know it's a question that to find an answer, I need a crystal ball, I would say. But there are a few trends that we see quite strongly internally, talking with our customer, etc. Definitely there are, let me say, some common trends that are seen in these markets. So, like getting to use higher and higher frequencies to enable a higher throughput, both in downlink wise, for Earth observation mission, but also uplink and downlink wise. So maybe for gateways, application for broadband constellation or broadband communication in general. So, and this, is not just higher frequencies in RF, but it means also quite a lot higher frequencies to get to optical communication in case. And then, of course, there is the fact to evolve the ground segment as a service, not just, to support LEO missions, but also to support higher orbit missions. So MEO, GEO in some cases, and also cislunar deep space. So really to evolve the same kind of method, but to other orbits, other kind of spacecraft, and not just to new space or small satellites, but really to that. One thing that we really believe a lot inside the Leaf Space is not just, that there will be this kind of trends, but actually, and I believe this kind of partnership program that we're building is really in that direction, is to see a more and more interconnection between satellites and the ground segment. Just because right now, technological point of view, but also from the service point of view, we can handle that. So, before, and it's still true for some ground station as a service provider, the satellite operator is actually the one driving also the kind of views from the ground segment. And that's definitely true, but it also means that the satellite operator needs to book, for example, specific passes over a specific ground station at a specific time. And this is, of course, a method that we are using from the start of the market, and made sense till a few years ago when the number of satellites the number of stations was much higher, let me say, than the number of satellites. Right now, it's totally the opposite. And so we need to have more interconnection between satellite operation, ground segment operation, and overall mission operation. Like, for example, to push really where we are already there with autonomous scheduling algorithms that actually schedule the activity of the network to supply the actual service that is needed by the satellite operator without them to do anything manual or automatically, but also getting more and more lower level on the kind of automation of operation on both sides. So apart from let me say, technological perspective, RF wise or frequency wise, there is also kind of a lot of innovation that could be done on the actual network operation, scheduling, and service provision.
Oh, brilliant. And, we touched on some of those points actually in our previous podcast back in March when we spoke about the importance of flexibility and versatility and compatibility between different companies and with emerging things like the optical wavelengths and stuff being used. So it's a lot going on in the industry. And I think, and we've covered, quite a bit of it today. So, I guess it's a good place to wrap up there, Giovanni. Thanks very much. Some really interesting insights into the ground segment as a service business model and what it can really bring to companies that have this challenge and opportunity of managing multiple missions and working on multiple missions. So, we really appreciate you spending time with us on the Space Industry Podcast today.
No, thanks to you for having me here, and I'm really glad to participate in this. And I'm following all your other podcasts, so it's really good, to have this way of talking, at least in the market. I believe it's really great and gives a lot of more understanding of what's going on.
Oh, great. Thank you. We appreciate it. And to all our listeners out there, remember you can find out more about Leaf Space on the satsearch platform at satsearch.com. You can find out about the individual aspects of the company's ground segment as a service business models, make requests for more information, technical information or commercial information, as well as introductions to the business. And we also have various other pieces of content we've produced in collaboration with LeafSpace. So be sure to check that out on our blog, podcast, and the website. Thank you very much for spending time with us today on the Space Industry Podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Space Industry by SatSearch. I hope you enjoyed today's story about one of the companies taking us into orbit. We'll be back soon with more in-depth, behind-the-scenes insights from private space businesses. In the meantime, you can go to satsearch.com for more information on the space industry today, or find us on social media if you have any questions or comments. To stay up to date, please subscribe to our weekly newsletter, and you can also get each podcast on demand on iTunes, Spotify, the Google Play Store, or whichever podcast service you typically use.